Our project was about increasing physical activity through self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. I'm Jessica Stapley.
I'm Daphne Perez.
I'm Emma Harvey.
I'm Samantha Brewer.
And I'm Stephanie Fornacieri.
As we went through the research, similar to our study, we came across a wide variety of information to supplement what was seen through our replication study. The prevalence of obesity has risen in the last 30 years. A study by Nurmi et al. In 2016 states that the increase in weight gain with younger populations starts with children not engaging in enough physical activity. This trend of inactivity starts with children, moves to adolescence, and then ultimately carries over into adulthood. Van Wormer, 2004, supplements that information in their study, stating that physical inactivity is the main reason that individuals become overweight. Studies have shown that 60% of adults do not meet the recommended physical activity criteria, and 25% are inactive. This information poses the question of why individuals want to engage in physical activity. Nurmi et al. 2016 targeted that question head-on, stating that motivation can play a huge role in whether or not individuals are going to engage in physical activity. People who are motivated to do things because they want to and not because others want them to have a higher chance of engaging in self-monitoring techniques to monitor physical activity goals, in turn making them more apt to engage in physical activity. Porzanjani et al. 2016 found that activity tracking is a great tool for monitoring weight loss, paired with a frequent self-monitoring system. Adults who track their weight loss journey will have more success. Weight loss tracking can be done with mobile applications. The use of mobile apps make engaging in physical activity easier for individuals and more accessible to keep track of their weight loss journey, as well as their physical activity goals. In addition to using mobile applications, the use of pedometers has shown an increase in physical activity and a decrease in health issues. Pedometers and mobile applications are a way of self-monitoring, which has been associated with weight loss and increasing awareness of physical activity, which was seen in a study by Turk et al. 2013. They also discovered that when daily feedback was given to participants, the more willing those participants are to engage in self-monitoring, which indirectly affects weight loss. The purpose of this project was to replicate the agreed-upon study by Norman, 2008. The study chosen was a multiple baseline by participant design, which focused on increasing daily steps taken. The goal of the study was to determine if implementation of self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback increases the amount of daily steps. The study also incorporated the use of pedometers to facilitate data validity. We agreed as a group that this would be a beneficial study to replicate and it would easily fit into all of our lifestyles.
So now I'm going to be talking about the method section. The participants included 5 grad students, which are all of us. We all exercise semi-regularly, and we were attempting to increase our daily steps. The participants were required to use a permanent recording product to record the daily steps. The products used include a Fitbit, used by Daphne, Samantha, and Jessica, and an Apple Watch used by myself, Stephanie, and Emma. The permanent product recording was required to keep track of the participants' daily steps. The setting included the natural environment. So both baseline and intervention were implemented in the participant's home, fitness center, grocery stores, parks, etc. The dependent variable of the study was steps. We defined steps as raising the left leg, placing it in front or next to the opposite foot, letting the raised foot touch the ground after being raised, and repeating the step with the opposite foot. Independent variable includes self-monitoring. So any instance the participant looked at their permanent recording product to identify the number of steps taken thus far. Goal setting was defined as calculating the average number of steps taken during the whole week, and feedback was defined as any instance of the participant receiving written feedback for meeting their goal or advice on how to meet their goal. The data collection method utilized was the frequency method. Participants collected data by inputting the frequency of daily steps on a shared Google document at the end of each day. The design used for the study was a multiple baseline across participants with an ABAB reversal design for each participant. The procedures for baseline included participants were unable to look at their step count throughout the day. At the end of the week, participants recorded their daily steps for each day on a shared Google document. During the baseline phase, feedback, goal setting, and self-monitoring did not occur. The average number of steps for their last baseline week was used as the goal for the first week of intervention. During intervention, participants were required to self-monitor their step count throughout the day. This included looking at their permanent recording product. Daily step counts were recorded on the shared Google document as well as on the Google Hangouts chat group. Participants provided written feedback to each other daily upon sharing their daily steps. If the participant met their goal, then they received written praise such as awesome job meeting your goal. If the participant did not meet their goal, then they received advice such as try running in place while watching TV or going out for a walk. At the end of the week, a new goal was set based on the average number of steps taken that week. Participants were required to meet their goal during 4 days out of the week. If they failed to meet the 4-day minimum, then their goal remained the same for the following week. Once data showed stability and low variability, participants returned to baseline. After a few days, once data showed stability, then they returned back to intervention phase. IOA data was also collected by uploading screenshot pictures of the daily steps, which you can see on the left. The screenshots were used to check inter-observer agreement. For example, a second person checked the pictures and compared those steps to the steps reported on the shared Google document. IOA data was calculated by dividing the number of agreements by the total number of sessions and multiplying by 100 to formulate a percentage. Treatment integrity was also collected. This was calculated based on the number of days the participants uploaded their daily step count on the shared Google Hangouts chat. If the participant reported their steps for the day, of the intervention were completed. If the participant failed to report their steps for the day, then they did not receive feedback, thus there was a lack of treatment integrity. Treatment integrity scores were calculated by dividing the number of days the steps were reported by the total number of days of the intervention and multiplied by 100 to formulate a percentage.
I will now talk about the results of our study and our graph. Our graph shows a multiple baseline across participants. There were 5 participants: Jessica, Emma, Stephanie, myself, Samantha, and Daphne. As seen by the first baseline, we all entered into baseline. And then, as seen in the next baseline, was the intervention of goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback. As you can see by the graph, Emma, Stephanie, and Daphne only made it into the first intervention phase and never got to return to baseline. Myself, Samantha, only returned to baseline once and then made it to the second intervention. And Jessica was the only participant in this study that made it return to baseline and then made it back to the second intervention. Down below, it says the total steps taken per day by each participant, and then the solid line in each phase represents the average number of daily steps that were taken. And this solid line helps to see whether or not our average daily step goal was above or below our baseline, whether or not this showed a functional relationship. Starting over to the left of this screen, Jessica, the first participant that is discussed, states that data reflects a functional relationship, as seen in the increase in her average daily step count. The solid line, as you can see in the graph, increases as she goes along to her last intervention phase, and continue to be higher than the first baseline when she returns to baseline. The next participant that will be discussed is Emma. The data reflect no significant change to physical activity during intervention. daily steps remained variable regardless of the intervention. No functional relation was observed. Next is Stephanie. Based on the data, the treatment wasn't effective in increasing her daily steps. During baseline, the average daily step count was higher when compared to the intervention. Similar trends in variability are seen in baseline intervention. Thus, there was not a functional relation in Stephanie's step count either in relation to the intervention. Next, myself, there actually was a functional relationship seen because of the increase in average daily step count when the intervention was implemented, and then the decrease in daily step count when returning to baseline, as seen by the solid line in baseline, and then it increased in intervention, and then when returning to baseline, the average daily step count went down. The decrease in daily step count in the return to baseline shows that the intervention was effective because when it was taken away, the daily steps decreased. And then lastly, Daphne, as demonstrated in the graph, the high variability does not show a functional relationship between the phases. During baseline intervention, step count did not change, even with a new average. And for this intervention, there was no change in between phases, therefore there was no functional relationship. So the only two participants who were shown a functional relationship were Jessica and Samantha. And now Daphne will talk about the conclusion of this study.
So although there was an average of daily steps increasing, maintaining the step goal and exceeding it was very difficult for the participants. Inside the original study, the participants had agreed that the intervention was successful. However, in the replication, we concluded that the intervention was difficult to manage with our busy schedules. The results suggest that when the participants are full-time students and full-time employees, it is very difficult of an intervention to carry out. For future replication, different populations should be taken into account, possibly students or those who work full-time, as well as different feedback procedures, such as maybe using text or email, or a combination of texting and face-to-face feedback. And then another suggestion could be a more in-depth definition of what feedback is needed so that the intervention is successful. The study can also be adapted so that different demographics of participants could use it and it can be successful within their specific situation. In summary, the results in the replication differ from the original study in that there was no functional relationship for all of the participants. Although the replication did follow through with the study's procedure, the participants did not match the time availability that the original study needed. In the future, it is important to keep in mind the needs and availability of the different populations and adapt it to their schedules and needs.
All right, so throughout our replication project, a handful of limitations arose. First and foremost was our sample size. There were only 5 of us completing this replication process. You can't really determine success or validity of the replication with such a small sample size. Again, only 2 out of the 5 of us showed a functional relation, which is not a big enough sample. Additionally, there is discrepancies between completing this study in the natural environment versus a more controlled setting. The original study was completed in a controlled setting where the participants' main focus was on the experiment. In the natural environment where we completed the study, we're all full-time students and full-time employees, and we had to make the juggle between, sitting down and finishing the rest of our homework or applying the feedback that had been given to us to go out and take another walk or do steps in front of the TV. Obviously, getting our work and schoolwork had to be the priority. Another limitation was if a group member were to have an injury or be sick. An example of this was I spent the first 2 weeks of intervention with pneumonia. Regardless of what the feedback was for the intervention, it was just not plausible to increase the daily step intake. Additional limitations could have been if a watch or the fitness tracker had died. Any sort of weekends, typically weekends would decrease step count, again, just because of our busy graduate school lives. A common motto throughout our project was that life happens, and that these are just some factors to keep in mind when replicating this particular study. Next is a look at our reference list. We hope you enjoyed our presentation, and that is all. Thanks.